Hello. Looks like we do have some participants and attendees today. And we're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to make sure everyone pops in here. It looks like more folks are joining us tonight. Excellent. Wonderful. I think a couple people are still joining us, so we're going to give them just some space to do that. And then I'll get started here in about 1 minute. Okay, excellent. Siri here. Let me know if I can help. Okay, well, welcome everyone and good evening. I'm gonna go ahead and close my participants. It looks like we've got about 30 folks and there will be more joining us tonight. So good evening. Welcome to the City of Shoreline's 175th Street Corridor Improvement Project's online webinar. My name is Christine Edens and I'm with an organization called Enviro Issues, and I will be your facilitator for tonight's webinar, which includes a presentation and a Q&A session. We will do introductions for other panelists that you may see in your view here in just a moment. But we do hope you found yourself in the right place, and we really appreciate you joining us. Looks like we've got about 30 participants tonight so far. And again, more folks will be joining us as they're able to, between whatever else is going on at home, I'm sure. Thank you for your flexibility as we've amended this format of engagement for the project and shifted to this online platform during this unprecedented time. And we really do hope all of you and your loved ones are staying healthy and are well. Next slide. Let's go ahead. A few notes just before we get started. Just like if we were in the room together, there's always some logistics to work out. But in this case, there's some online logistics. Please be aware that tonight's conversation is being recorded, and we will make that recording available on the project website. You will be muted during this webinar, but you will be able to hear the panelists. We will come in and out. The panelists that you see on your view right now that have video are our presenters. I will encourage you, if you hover over your top right portion of your screen, you'll see an option called speaker view or gallery view. If you click speaker view, you only see the person really speaking. And then and the presentation that's being shared. If you click on gallery view, you can see all of the panelists as well as the presentation. Just really your preference. Again, we'll review the agenda in more specificity in just a moment and have a Q&A session tonight starting at about 6:35, and we'll adjourn around 7 o'clock. If you do have any questions as we go through the presentation, if you hover on your bottom bar, and many of us are becoming pros at formats like this, like Zoom, if you hover on your bottom bar and you see a double bubble that says Q&A, that's where you can submit a question at any time. You go ahead and click that double bubble, and you can submit a question at any time. We'll see your questions come in, and those you can also see as they come in. Next slide. As with any platform right now we're all dealing with, there could always be technical difficulties. So if you do have any technical difficulties, we've provided a resource for you. Candace is on our team, and you can call Candace or text Candace at the number you see here, and I'll read it out loud in case anyone has any visual difficulties with what you're seeing. 206-519-5220. And you can also email Candace at cplendl@enviroissues, which is enviroissues.com. She will be able to respond to you at any point, and she also will add her information to a chat function, which is also, if you hover at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a single bubble, and there you will see the chat, and you already see that Candace has added her information here in case you do need to get in touch with her and we move past the screen and you now know where to find that information again. Another quick reminder, all of the information presented tonight can also be found on our project website and by the online engagement survey site that we have up right now. You can go to shorelinewa.gov, so shorelinewa.gov/175 corridor, and you can click to at the top of the page and find our online survey there as well. We look forward to your questions tonight and comments submitted via that online survey. And again, if your friend or neighbor is unable to join us tonight, that's okay. Please share the website for them to see all the same information. We just like to offer this platform so we can have a bit of a conversation, have a little bit more of a human touch while we cannot be in person. And with that, I think next slide, I'll turn it over to our project manager, Leif Johansson, for our agenda review, more introductions, and a brief orientation to the project we're talking about tonight.
Hey, thanks, Christine. So yeah, I'm Leif Johansson. I'm a capital project manager for the city of Shoreline, and I'm the project manager for this roadway project. We're here this evening to really present our design concepts for the corridor of 175th between Stone Ave and I-5. We also are looking at the intersection of 175th and Meridian Ave. As Christine mentioned, we'll have a Q&A session, and we definitely encourage all of you to participate. This is a great time for you to voice your questions and let us take a shot at answering those as best we can. Our goal here really is to provide as much information about our project as possible. So when you go in and fill out your online surveys, you feel confident in the information you know and the comments you provide us. With that, I'd like to kind of go through who will be speaking tonight, who some of our team members are. Next slide, please. So there on the left, that's me, Leif Johansson, Capital Project Engineer for the City of Shoreline. We also have Trisha Yunke. She is the city's city engineer. We have Kendra Dudinsky, the city's traffic engineer. Next slide. From our consultant team, we have Dan Hansen and Brianne Ross with Petit. They're managing the consultant team. And we have Tara Olson with WSP. She's our traffic expert. Next slide. During the Q&A session, you'll be hearing from Jim Howard with HBB. He's our landscape architect. We also have Steve Reinhardt with Universal Field Services. He's our property and right-of-way expert. And then you have already met Christine Edens with Enviro Issues. She's our lead for all of our outreach work. Next slide. So this slide shows a vicinity map of the project. And as you can see there in blue, the project begins just outside of City Hall and extends east down the hill all the way to I-5. This section of 175th is one of the busiest roads in the city. It connects Aurora with I-5 and then even further to the east to 15th. Our goal here is to improve this chunk of 175th for all users. That includes pedestrians, vehicles, and bicyclists. Over the last several years, we've been working to identify transportation needs for this corridor. We recognize that as the city grows, as transit expands, we're going to continue to see increased traffic on this corridor. We also know that the future trail by the rail project will come into play, and we're looking at how we can best provide pedestrian and bicycle connectivity to that trail system. So in spring 2019, last spring, we spoke with property owners, local businesses, community organizations, and then just people who use the corridor on a daily basis about the project and then about their individual priorities. And since then, we've used all the feedback that we collected, and we've developed several design concepts for the corridor. Well, we have two design concepts for the corridor. The first is the multi-use path concept. The second is a buffered bike lane concept. And then for the intersection of Meridian and 175th, we've developed two concepts, one being a roundabout concept, and the second is an improved signal at the intersection. Tonight, we'll just be walking you through those concepts and hopefully then in the Q&A session, answering any questions you have. This really is probably the most critical stage of the design process. This is where you have the ability to voice your opinions, Let us know what you think we might have been missing, what you think we could do differently, and we will use those items to steer the path ahead and come to our preferred or recommended concept. And again, the way to log your feedback is to go onto our online engagement and survey website and fill out your survey. And we'll, the web address is up there on the screen, but we'll continue to kind of reiterate that because that is the place to go. And with that, I will hand this off to Dan Hansen. He'll talk about our phase 1 public outreach and how we got to where we are today.
Thank you, Leif. As Leif mentioned, we reached out to the community back in spring of 2019, a little over a year ago. Really, at that point, we were trying to collect a lot of your interest and figure out what the issues were that that the public was concerned about with the corridor and what you knew and experienced on the street. So we had a number of outreach components. We had stakeholder interviews with interested parties out there, the Meridian Elementary, Aurora Community Church, the Meridian Neighborhood Group as well. We had a drop-in session for those, the property owners and the adjacent properties that were on 175th. We met with those, gave those people some individual attention on that. We had an in-house open house or in-person open house, and we had also had the online engagement similar to what we have right now as well. So with all the intent of learning what was most important to you. So this board may look familiar to you. We asked you to rank the importance of each of the criteria by placing a dot along the arrow, whether you felt it was less important and not worthy of extra cost, or was more important and felt strong that it should be incorporated with additional expense or whatever is needed to get it included. So slide 2. So we had the evaluation criteria that we covered in that phase 1 was 1, pedestrian walkability, or sidewalks, ability to get through the corridor for both, all modes of transportation, including the ADA accessibility for wheelchair ramps, crosswalks, and pedestrian signals, bus transportation, transit speed, ease of use, timeliness, and bus stop improvements, bike facilities, a continuous path separated from different modes of transportation so that they have their own way to get to and from along the corridor, vehicle traffic flow, reducing congestion at the intersection in particular, and ability to make safe turns into the side streets. Safety was also looked at or considered for all modes of travel, including controlling speeds, reducing collisions, providing safe pedestrian crossings. And then we also asked for input on landscaping and what you felt the importance of that was and what kind of things you would like to see along there. We also asked about creating a sense of place, placemaking, and we will determine potential streetscapes and designs at a later date. So that's something that we'll be working on as we come up with the preferred alternative, and that'll be upcoming in the next round of outreach. So slide 3 just kind of summarizes some of this, and this is how things turned out. Here were the results were weighted and ranked, and what's most important to you. You can see here the pedestrian walkability was obviously the biggest concern of the input from the folks that participated in the survey. So in our current online engagement, we'll ask you to reaffirm that we got this correct. So we encourage you to go to that site and put your input in and participate in that as well for this round of outreach. We'll be also considering some other items, the more technical issues that we'll need to review to really narrow it down to a single design concept. We'll weight the trade-offs of each of those criteria and your feedback to determine what's the preferred concept. So those items that will be concluded will be like the impact to right-of-way impacts and community impacts to properties that are adjacent, incorporating the current Meridian Elementary Park improvements along the area, the stormwater and the environmental work, and what that cost is and what the impact is, particularly to Ronald Bog in that area, and just overall project costs. We don't have an unlimited budget, so we will be looking at trying to come up with a project that can be maintained in the city for the long term, and as well as phasing those options. So there's in winter 2021 or January, February next year, we'll reach out and share how all the selection and the preliminary design concepts came together and into a preferred alternative. So that'll be the next phase of the work. Slide 4, or next slide, not my slide 4. So we've spent quite a bit of effort here in the last spring looking through and doing some analysis on what was happening out there along the corridor. We began our initial study of doing like traffic flow and traffic patterns, reviewed safety requirements, and considered existing facilities and other, like the retaining walls, and how we can incorporate those in if possible. We looked at how to make the corridor more accessible to walking for wheelchairs, buses, and explored how to meet our transportation goals and needs through the city's transportation master plan and complete streets policy. So the alternatives that we've developed today really are trying to look at all those elements and how do we address those best. So now I'll turn it over to Kendra to talk a little bit more about the traffic and some of the city perspective.
Hi there. So I'm Kendra Dudinsky, the City of Shoreline traffic engineer, and I wanted to provide just a little bit of background information driving the need for this project. One of those pieces of information stems from the transportation impact fees, which are fees paid by redevelopment that increase vehicle trips to the city's street network. So these fees help to fund growth projects like this one, particularly 175th and Meridian, to ensure that delays do not exceed the city's set level service standard of D, which is no more than 55 seconds per vehicle on average. Also importantly, and likely somewhat unsurprising to most of you, the city's recent sidewalk prioritization process ranked this corridor highest in need of pedestrian improvements, and that's in the context of the roadway characteristics, which is high speed, high volume, lots of pedestrian generation. With what we know about planned land use changes today, we expect to see an increase in traffic volumes of approximately 11% by 2040. By 2040, the intersection of Meridian and 175th will operate with more delay than today if no improvements are made, and will exceed the city's level of service standard. We expect that the freeway intersections at 175th and I-5 will increase, and we're not currently proposing improvements at these intersections since they're outside of the city's jurisdiction, as Washington State DOT owns and maintains those intersections. But we are proposing some adjustments to lengths of turn pockets, for example, which should help to alleviate some of that delay a little bit. And at that, I'm going to turn it over to Tara for some more specific intersection analysis and delay conversation.
Thank you. So I'm Tara Olson. I'm part of the consultant team, as Leif mentioned. So this map here shows you the traffic flow and volumes on the roadway today. These are based on counts that were taken last spring, so they're very current. And you may actually recognize this graphic. This is the one that we showed you at last year's open house, just kind of showing, the existing conditions that are out there. How you read this is you look at the colored dots at the intersection, and they're showing you the amount of delay. The delay itself can actually be seen in the two boxes that are right next to those dots. So the box on the left, or the white box, is the AM peak, or the delay during the AM peak period. And the box on the right, the black box, is the delay during the PM peak period. So when you're looking at those dots, a green dot is going to indicate little delay at that intersection. An orange dot is going to indicate more congestion, and a red dot is going to show you the higher congestions. So I do want to point out that the delay that's actually shown on these is the average delay for the intersection during that peak hour. So you might say, geez, when I go out there and I'm taking a particular movement, I feel like I see more delay than that. That's because this is averaging all the movements that you're actually taking. So on the next slide shows the 2040 conditions. So as Kendra mentioned, this shows an 11% growth in traffic out there. And we're showing what it's going to look like at these different intersections. The intersection at 175th and Meridian is actually the only one that we're recommending major improvements at. So you see that in the no build condition, that is showing you a red dot, showing you the more congested. The second one down is with the signalized intersection improvement, and then the bottom one is with our roundabout scenario, which I'll be showing you in a little bit. So as the traffic grows, so does the delay grow. And as Kendra mentioned, we're going to be exceeding the city standards at this intersection. She also mentioned that the freeway ramps will also grow, but that we're not looking at that as part of the project of improvements. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Brianne, who's going to talk a little bit about the corridor improvements.
Good evening. So we used the feedback that we got from you all last spring on the design criteria, as well as the analysis that we did that Dan and Tara both talked about, to develop our draft design concepts. There are some features that you'll see in all of the design concepts. These were things that were ranked really high on the design criteria that we heard from you, like providing continuous sidewalks on both sides of 175th. Also included in that is high visibility crosswalks at Wallingford, longer turn lanes at Meridian and I-5 to help improve that flow of traffic, and we'll be keeping 2 lanes of travel in each direction like you see out there today. We're also incorporating the city's plans to develop bike lanes on Meridian and on 175th, as well as some low maintenance landscaping and streetscape design. We also evaluated a concept that completed the sidewalk network, but did not include any other improvements to the corridor. This did not really address the community feedback that we heard, which indicated that more should be done to improve conditions on the corridor for safety. It also was not in compliance with Shoreline's complete street policy because it did not include bike facilities, and therefore it did not move forward as a viable concept. Doing this evaluation of that sidewalk only concept did help us determine, though, that the major impacts to properties would be similar regardless of the design concept chosen. Next slide. So first we'll take a look at the Meridian to I-5 section. We're exploring a couple different options for this segment between Meridian and I-5, the details of which will require discussions with the Washington State Department of Transportation, and also has major considerations for the impacts to Meridian Park Elementary and the Ronald Bogg Park. All of the options will look much like you see on the screen today. They will all have the same car configuration for lanes, vehicle lanes. There'll be opportunities for tree pits, for trees in either tree pits or in the landscape buffer. And they all have a shared use path along both sides of 175th. A shared use path is just another word for a wider sidewalk. A sidewalk that has space to have pedestrians, bicyclists, people on scooters, people in wheelchairs, people pushing strollers. All of those people would fit on this wider sidewalk and use that shared use path facility. This will be the layout for the section between Meridian and I-5, regardless of the corridor concept A or B that is selected for the rest of the corridor. Next. So corridor concept A completes the sidewalk network with that wide multi-use or shared use path. It improves transportation safety with the center median, and it has a lot of opportunity to improve the landscape character with opportunity for trees both in the landscape median and in the landscape buffers. Now I will say that we're really early in our design process. So as Leif mentioned, we're really looking for input through our online open house on both concept A and concept B. We're going to use that feedback that you guys provide us and develop one preferred concept. Once we have that one preferred concept, we'll be able to dive deeper into the design details and get further along. Next slide. So corridor concept B is what we have a buffered bike lane. So really the main difference between A and B is where is the space for the bicyclists located. So this completes the sidewalk network with a little bit narrower sidewalk. It does add buffered bike lanes on the road, and it improves safety between people using the sidewalk and the roadway with that landscape buffer. Next slide. So we as a design team considered these two concepts against the design criteria that we heard from you in the first phase of engagement last spring. And I should say that we expect improvement from today's conditions for all design concepts for all evaluation criteria. So this really is, no matter what concept we move forward, it is an improvement over what's out there today. And it does really help those things that we heard were really important to you, like the sidewalks. What we think though, rather than just us telling you why we think these concepts meet the design criteria, we want to hear from you. And so what's more important is how you feel about these two concepts and how they meet your needs and rank against these criteria, which you can tell us in the online open house. So we'll use those rankings that you provide and determine the preferred alternative moving forward. Now I'll turn it over to Tara to talk about the Meridian and 175th intersection design.
Thanks, Brianne. So in addition to those corridor design concepts, we also looked at two concepts at the intersection of 175th and Meridian, one being a roundabout and one being improvements to a signalized intersection. Both of the design concepts are compatible with both the corridor concept A and corridor concept B that Brianne actually showed. And there are pros and cons to each of these, the roundabout versus the signal. The practice is always to look at a roundabout whenever a project calls for an intersection improvement. So on the next slide, we show some of the pros and cons of a roundabout. So a roundabout is going to have some improved safety compared to a signalized intersection. A lot of that is due to the fact that you're forced to go at slower speeds as you enter the roundabout, and it's one-way traffic. There is a reduction of delay in both the vehicles and the people walking. The people walking are not having to wait for the pedestrian light to come on that they can go across the intersection. There's reduced air and noise pollution and a lower fuel usage because there's less stops, less harder acceleration, and no idling, or very little idling. It tends to be a lower maintenance cost because there's not a signal to maintain. However, there are also some cons for a roundabout. People walking, using a wheelchair, pushing a stroller, it's going to be a little different of an environment on like a signalized intersection where you're actually told when to cross the road. So you're using a little bit of your own judgment there. Drivers might not be as familiar with a roundabout, particularly a multi-lane roundabout, which we're proposing on this project. And roundabouts typically take more space. So the footprint of it is going to be a little bit bigger than a signalized intersection. It's definitely more complicated to construct as well. Instead of widening a roadway or building linearly to a roadway, you're now building a circular roadway where you once had a straight roadway. So the next slide actually shows some existing roundabouts, multi-lane roundabouts. Those on the left are a roundabout in Linden, and those on the right are a roundabout in Covington. We're not going to show you an example of a signalized intersection because it's going to look very similar to what's out there today. So the next slide, talk a little bit about the pros and cons of a signalized intersection. A signal provides a very familiar experience to drivers. They're usually very comfortable with it. It provides a very orderly movement because you're waiting to go until the light tells you to go, as opposed to when you feel comfortable going. It provides clearer guidance as well to people walking and going across those crosswalks in a wheelchair, pushing a stroller, bicycles. It does have some of the cons, or it does have a higher maintenance cost due to maintaining the signal, and it can also fail during a power outage. It can cause delay in people walking, biking, and traveling by vehicle, particularly during those non-peak hours, because again, you are having to wait for the light. And it has more conflict points and potential for higher speeds than a roundabout does. This can result in a poorer safety outcome for vehicles as well as people walking and biking. The next slide is going to show you what a roundabout concept actually looks like. So it is a two-lane roundabout. There are two lanes circling this roundabout. You've got your existing 4 entry points. A roundabout does provide you some opportunity for some landscape medians. So there you see actually the hardscape medians in the brown, and then the landscape median, particularly in the center in the green. And that provides a great opportunity for some public art or placemaking. There's enhanced efficiency based on today's signal as well as the future signalized option. Shorter crossing distance if you're crossing at the crosswalk there. Each crosswalk, though, I do want to point out, will have a pedestrian activated warning sign, a flashing sign similar to what's out at the school today. I do want to point out also that people that are biking along 175th or Meridian will not actually be biking through the roundabout. They will be forced onto the sidewalk to cross at the crosswalk. We don't want the mixing of the vehicles and the bicycles within the roundabout itself. This concept does require reconstruction of the newly constructed shared use path out in front of the Meridian Park Elementary. We did, in developing this concept and the signal concept, did look at the future bike lanes along Meridian that is part of the city's plan, as well as how these designs meld with the frontage improvements at the school. So the next slide shows you our signalized intersection improvements. Thank you. It looks very similar to what's out there today. One of the main differences is the lane configuration on the north leg. You see that we've actually revised that to be 2 left turn lanes and then 1 through and right shared lane. What this does is it allows the northbound and southbound left turn movements to go at the same time. That's going to make the signal operate more efficiently, and there's just going to be kind of some less wasted time at the signal. This design also provides a longer westbound left turn pocket onto Meridian, which also Kendra had mentioned that we did look at extending a left turn pocket to the freeway as well. This concept improves vehicle capacity over the existing condition and provides a really consistent walking path for people using the crosswalks. It incorporates the newly constructed shared use path in front of the Meridian Park Elementary as well. And again, this concept, just like the roundabout concept, does incorporate the future bike lanes on Meridian as well as the frontage improvements at the school. The next slide, similar to the one you saw with the corridor, shows you how we evaluated the intersection improvements versus the roundabout versus the signalized intersection. And as we said, please go to that online open house and provide us some feedback on these criteria and the evaluation of them. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Leif, who's going to talk about the project timelines.
Thanks, Tara. So again, thank you for your flexibility in switching over to online and virtual platforms for this outreach. As you can see from our timeline here, over the last months, we've been meeting with property owners and other stakeholders, and we've done all of that in virtual meetings. Initially, that had all been, it was supposed to be in-person meetings, but due to COVID, we had to make some adjustments, and it's gone quite well. Moving forward, we will be collecting all of the input that we get in our surveys, and you know, as mentioned, we'll be refining our design concepts into that preferred design concept, and coming back to you this winter to share that and collect more information from you. Next slide. So going back to our online engagement and survey website, this is really the critical place where we need you to log in and fill out your surveys. There are 2 ways to get into this site. One is you can go to our just general project website and then follow links into the survey website. So you type in shorelinewa.gov/175 corridor and then follow the links to the online open house, or you can just go directly in by typing 175corridor.participate.online, and that'll take you right into our survey. Our online open house has been live since July 6th and will remain open until August 9th. So you do have a little bit of time to get in there and take a look at our information and fill out your surveys. Any questions that you may have, don't hesitate to reach out to me, give me a call or send me an email, and I'll do my best to help you along. That's really important to us to provide that service. And my contact information is all over the place, but certainly on the last slide of this presentation, we'll have that up for you as well. So with that, I think we're ready to turn this over to the Q&A session.
Okay, wonderful. And incredibly, we are right at 6:35, which never happens, right? So we have a full 25 minutes of time for questions and answers. And we do have a couple questions coming in already, but just as you are working to get your questions in, just a couple more reminders on how to do so from the beginning. So again, hover over the bottom of the screen, look for the double bubble Q&A, go ahead and click there, and you should have a pop-up that comes up where you can type in your question. And in order for us to get to as many questions as possible during this Q&A time, I will do my best to sort through, if needed, similar questions that we receive from all of you. So I will read questions out loud for you and all the panelists, so they have time to think about their answer to your question. If they don't sound completely verbatim, it might be because I'm grouping them, so that's why. If you do just put a comment in, I will not be reading those out loud. We're going to focus on your questions right now, and really please focus on questions and submit those comments like Leif and others have reminded you to do via that online survey. We want to capture them. If you do put in a comment, that's okay. We'll go ahead and document that as well. And we will have a written summary to deliver after this, in addition to the recording of this webinar. If we run out of time and we don't quite get to your question, we'll make sure to document your written question in that meeting summary as well. That will also be posted online. So we'll get you that answer at some point here in the process as well. Leif will be fielding your questions, but Leif will also be calling on his team to help. And with that, let's get started. At this point, I would encourage you to go to your gallery view. As you can see, the presentation has magically disappeared, and hopefully if you go to the gallery view, you can see all of the panelists at this point. Panelists, if you are available for Q&A, you can go ahead and undo your video if you're comfortable and your connections are working okay, and that way the folks on the other end can see your friendly faces as we're answering some questions today. Okay, they're coming in. I love seeing this. So one question that was actually asked through the chat. So again, please use the Q&A, but that's all right. I want to get to it as bikes allowed in the roundabout. Are bikes going to be allowed in the roundabout? And this person specifically requested that they would prefer that, just as a context piece. So Leif, I'll have you take that one and then dish it off as you need to.
Yeah, Tara, do you want to kind of discuss bikes and roundabouts? And then Kendra, if you have anything to add, go ahead.
Sorry, it took me a second to find that. Christine, I think I need you to repeat the question. I was messing with my screen trying to get it to show right.
Okay, that's why I'm here to read them out loud. So are bikes going to be allowed in the roundabout as it's presented here, and this person particularly would prefer that?
Bikes are not allowed in the roundabout. So bicyclists will have to merge onto the sidewalk, and we will have a transition section to do that in. So it's not going to be a difficult transition, but they will actually have to transition onto the sidewalk and then cross at the crosswalk. So they will not be allowed in the roundabout with the vehicles. With the different lane changes that end up taking place in a roundabout, it can be very dangerous to have bicycles in that mix as well.
So I'll correct that a little bit, Tara.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. No, that's fine. That's fine.
No worries. So the bike ramps up onto the sidewalk into the mixing zones are preferred for cyclists that are less comfortable being in the circulating roadway. So that option is provided to join the sidewalk, because certainly all ages and abilities is they're not going to be able to make their way through a roundabout in general. So the Washington state law still applies that if you would like to join in the roadway and circulate the roundabout through the roadway section, that is still allowed by law. So those real avid cyclists that feel comfortable doing so can still do so. But you want to make sure that you're very visible, have reflective gear on, because obviously you would need to be seen in a multi-lane roundabout, which, as Tara pointed out, can be challenging. So just make sure that you're seen well. But for all other folks that don't mind taking a couple extra seconds to join the mixing zone on the sidewalk, that's still certainly an option.
It sounds like it's a choice.
Yes.
Great. Okay. Since we're on the topic of roundabouts, there's some more questions coming in here about roundabouts. Talk to us a little bit about how you anticipate speeds reducing with a roundabout versus a signalized intersection, and how we can plan for safety during school on those off hours with the children trying to cross without lights with a roundabout.
Yeah, Tara and Kendra, why don't you go after that one?
Yeah, I can start with the, definitely the speeds in a roundabout are much lower. You're having to reduce your speed in a roundabout to about 20, 25 miles an hour to actually maneuver the roundabout safely. Whereas a signal, if you're approaching a green light, you're able to actually stay at the roadway speed. So you're reducing your speeds a good 15 miles an hour when you're going through this roundabout. So it is definitely slower. As far as the school children crossing, actually, Kendra, did you want to add anything to that part?
On the speeds, you'll unmute.
Let's see.
There we go.
There we go.
You're good.
All right. So yeah, as Tara pointed out, speeds are lower, typically hovering around 20 miles per hour is sort of the top end-ish speed, sometimes a little bit higher for multi-lane roundabouts, but still considerably lower what people are going as they're accelerating into a green light. So that brings a lot of safety benefits with it, both for non-motorized and for motorized vehicles. And to the point of bikes circulating the roundabout, I think that's another good point that ties in, which is vehicles are typically traversing the roundabout at lower speeds than vehicles would generally be going through a signalized intersection. So while being in a roundabout as a bicyclist or as a pedestrian may seem somewhat challenging or unsafe, the circulating speeds and the entry speeds are much lower than would be typical for a signalized intersection. So that presents a lot of safety benefits. Those diagrams that show the pedestrian serious injury or fatality rate at various speeds, and at 20 miles per hour, it's very, very rare that a pedestrian or bicyclist really gets into a serious injury collision. So that's why we really try to target those lower speeds for safety. In terms of the school operations, yeah, that's certainly a big dynamic challenge that we have to manage, and we'll have to, if we end up selecting a roundabout, we'll want to model that a little bit more specifically, I think. But in general, a lot of the driveway flow that comes in and out would be not affected in any different way than it is today for the traffic signal. And in fact, it might be a little bit more flexible with the roundabout as everything's sort of flowing smoothly instead of a sort of platooning effect that a signal can create by allowing a big flow onto a street at once. I think in general, there are some improved pedestrian safety crossing improvements at 170th and Meridian that we've installed recently, the rapid rectangular flashing beacons, and the same would be true for all the other crossings that I think we talked about earlier. So any of the school activity would be still, they'd be available to cross via the pedestrian activated beacons with the crossing guards as is present today. And I think probably what's of note too is Wallingford there'd be some safety improvements inherent to that crossing as well. Right now, there are flashing beacons, pedestrian activated flashing beacons, but there'd be some additional improvements that would come along with that under either alternative.
Well, and Kendra, you just answered another question that I was going to ask, which is, are there plans to improve that crossing at Wallingford to Meridian Elementary School? And it sounds like the answer to that is yes, with any of the concepts.
Definitely, and I think that's been a key focus for the design team all along. We've been aware of the residents and parents of the school, all the folks that have come around, rallied around the comments on this project have pointed out that crossing is of concern or of highlighted need for improvement, and definitely some improvements will be made in terms of pedestrian refuge island in the center that will help provide a little breathing room for pedestrians as they cross that street, pedestrian activated flashing beacons, and some other sort of visibility treatments that would improve the crossing there.
Okay, and I'm gonna stick with the roundabout topic just one more time, bear with me, and then we'll give Tara and Kendra a little bit of a break because I think you're fielding most of these, but there's a question here that I think relates to how bicycles and pedestrians are able to cross and maneuver and navigate that roundabout at will. So they make that choice of when to go ahead and cross. How does that actually support, or what does that look like in terms of the traffic flow? Does that effectively then just turn the roundabout almost into a stoplight all the time for for cars also trying to get through if pedestrians and bicyclists gets to decide when they need to stop to allow their crossing.
I might be able to feel that a little bit better, Tara, just in my working with the school operations. I'll take a stab first.
You bet.
So in terms of sort of the on-demand nature, certainly that is a concern that we see and that we model in the roundabout analysis. The school operation brings a unique perspective as I just talked about. So certainly you have large influxes for a period of about 15 minutes. Typically, and so, you know, a comparable example would be at Wallingford and 175th, where there is a on-demand rapid flashing beacon that pedestrians are activating. The school crossing guards tend to manage that crossing. So they'll hold platoons of pedestrians, let vehicle traffic flow for a little while, and then cross the pedestrians in a platoon. So they're not constantly pushing the button and holding up traffic. Now, that's not to say that there isn't a pedestrian priority during those school crossing times. There certainly is, and vehicles are delayed as such, but it's typically only for about a period of 15 minutes or so. And in the PM, that's typically separated from the PM peak, so not as big of a crunch there. In terms of just in general, I wouldn't expect to see the huge platoons or big crunch periods of pedestrian and bicyclists that would really hold up the traffic signal in a way that would mimic a signal or really just snarl operations completely. It doesn't tend to occur that way, especially not in an area like this where there isn't, you know, a huge density of pedestrians and bicyclists regularly. But it does provide a really great opportunity for pedestrians and bicyclists to get in there and be the priority when they're out there waiting in the rain or trying to get to the bus in a more timely fashion. Whereas a signal can cause delay of up to 2 minutes. So that's a really good benefit for pedestrians and bicyclists.
And Kendra did such a great job. I have nothing to add.
Okay, Leif. Oh, yeah. Okay, Leif, we have a question here. We're changing topics a little bit, and we'll come back to roundabouts. I think there's going to be more questions about them, but might as well give our brains a little bit of a switch to some of the earlier questions that were asked. The first one here is, what is the public trees along 175th that are anticipated with the
Was the question, what are the impacts to trees? Sorry, you kind of broke out.
Yes.
Yeah.
What is the impact to public trees along 175th?
Okay, I'll say a couple of things and then I'll let Brianne add whatever she has. But so we have the two corridor concepts, and each of these concepts have virtually the same footprint. They're about a foot different in width. And so the impact to trees within the right-of-way is virtually the same between the two. So we do acknowledge that there are quite a few, or there's several street trees down there. Also, those street trees have really damaged the sidewalks, especially in the chunk between Meridian and I-5. So those are probably going to have to come out. But I think the thing I wanted to kind of highlight is that both concepts really have the same impacts to trees. And most of the street trees out there probably will need to be removed. So Brianne, if you have any more to add, go ahead.
The only other thing that I will add is, you know, we do have an arborist on our team. Once we have the preferred concept, we will be working with the arborist to evaluate the trees that are out there today. The condition, as Leif said, there are some that have caused a lot of upheaval in the sidewalk, so it might not be the right tree or for the right place. And so we'll continue to work with the arborist as we move forward to evaluate those trees.
And Jim, do you have any more to add just on tree selection? How we're kind of thinking this through in terms of what we've seen out there and in other locations?
Well, yes, we will be looking at, you know, special details for the planting of new trees that will avoid some of the problems we're seeing now, such as conflicts with sidewalks and heaving sidewalks due to tree roots. And also selecting trees that work well in terms of adjacent vehicles and bicyclists going by. And of course, something that looks beautiful. We'll be selecting beautiful trees.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much for that. The next question is actually a clarifying question from our presentation. The question is about what the weighted ranking numbers represent. I think it might have something to do with the low, medium, high graphics that we showed about both the concepts and the intersections and how those compared to the design criteria that we were referring to that Dan helped walk us through.
Dan and Brianne, do you want to talk about the weighted ranking and how that methodology went?
Yeah, I'll jump in and I'll even maybe call on Chelsea if she has anything to add. So in the first round of engagement in spring of last year, as Dan mentioned, we went through and asked people what was most important to them. And, you know, as it related to the financial impact of what adding those features might cause. And I believe that on our online open house, that was more of a high, medium, low type question. And so then in order to show what rose to the top when someone ranked that as a high priority on the online open house, then that got a higher number. And if someone ranked it as a low priority, that's how it shows those numbers. Chelsea?
That's exactly, yeah, hi. That's exactly right, Brianne. We assigned numbers to both the online and the in-person and then sort of added them all up. So we wanted to make sure to capture not just everyone that ranked pedestrian walkability as the highest priority, but also people that maybe thought that it was medium priority and sort of adding all of those together. So that's how you got the number. I think it's 567 for pedestrian walkability. We added all of those up from online and in person, and then we did the same for all of the other criteria. And that's how we came up with those.
Super, thank you. This question sounds a little bit more like a comment, but just in a world where the main problem is everyone hurrying too much, isn't stopping at a red light and taking a few good breaths a good idea? So it seems like there's some preference there in that case for a signalized intersection. And then we do see some impacts to properties, and this question is about kind of the magnitude of that impact. So is there a difference in the number of complete or full parcel acquisitions between concept A and concept B that we are seeing? I'll dish that to Leif and then see if others are able to help inform that, like Steve.
Yeah, so like I mentioned when I was talking about trees, the right-of-way impacts or impacts to private property are virtually the same between the two concepts. They have the same footprint. So we have over the last few months been reaching out to all the impacted property owners and just trying to make sure that they know kind of what lies ahead and give them as much time as possible to kind of figure out what their plans are. But yeah, again, both concepts for the corridor have virtually the same impacts to private property.
Yes, Leif, that's true. We've looked at the impacts on both concepts. There's maybe 1 foot difference, and there is no difference in the number of parcels that are impacted badly enough to be considered for a full acquisition. There are no impacts that are so severe that they're actually hitting houses, but there are some impacts to driveways. Some of the slopes and the grades of the driveways are really steep now, and some will become impossibly steep with that much widening. So we have identified a few of the parcels that will have huge access impacts.
Okay, thank you. This question, I had to do a little bit of back and forth to clarify it, but I think we have the full question now, and it's really about Ashworth and how the team is thinking about Ashworth as a connector or side street to this project, and why has it not been discussed, and with its blocking Meridian and lack of sidewalks and lack of ability to only turn west onto 175th. Are we considering any improvements on these connecting streets?
Kendra, would you like to field that one?
I might ask Brianne to clarify a little bit too on the design elements, but in terms of the vehicular access, I'll speak to that, which is that we, right now, generally speaking, that access control, although understanding that it might be somewhat of a added delay for the handful of residents that it impacts, is working well to mitigate any collisions that would result from the vertical curves there, meaning the hill and sight lines associated with that. So right now, we took the approach of it's not broken, so doesn't necessarily need to be fixed in those terms for vehicular access. Now, I will say that for pedestrian and bicyclist access, it is not working quite as well as it maybe should, in that there are bus stops on either side of the street, just a little bit east of there, that people certainly are going back and forth, north and south across the roadway to and from. So improvements to accessibility and access in that respect is something that we are looking at as part of the design. But I think in general, the idea of the vehicular access is going to remain the same in terms of, but I would say also that we would love to hear feedback on that as well. I don't know that we would have received a lot of feedback on that specifically up to this point.
Yeah, and I'll just add, so for concept A, we have that center median in the middle of the road, and that provides opportunity for a pedestrian refuge. And so with concept A and that refuge island, meaning that you don't have to cross all of the lanes at once, you could cross half of them and you have a safe place to stop and before you cross the next half. So with concept A, we would look to add a crosswalk at Ashworth. Because we do have that pedestrian refuge. With concept B, we do not have that center median up at Ashworth, and so that is a concept where we would not have that pedestrian crossing with concept B.
That was a great clarification. Thank you for that. If you've seen in our chat, I'm cognizant of our time. We have about 3 minutes left and about 3 questions. I'm going to try to get us through as much as we can. There have been some questions that might be good for the group that have been answered in writing by Kendra. What does level of service D mean? It relates to the amount of time or delay that a driver receives or experiences on the corridor and an average peak hour, which D would be 35 to 55 seconds of delay. And then how far offset from the existing intersection would crosswalks be at a roundabout? So I was actually curious about that too. It looks like 20 to 30 feet from the existing crosswalk location. So they'd be set back from the actual intersection there. A few more questions and hopefully we can get to them. This is back to that weighted ranking. I don't know if we know the answer to this off the top here, but how many people participated in the last survey with those weighted rankings of what are the community's priorities?
Chelsea, do you know those numbers by chance?
If you give me a moment, I can look that up. Why don't you go to the next question?
We can give you a moment. That's why I asked that one next. I bet we can sleuth that out pretty quickly here. And just a reminder, we had an online survey as well during the last round of outreach, as well as an in-person. So it'd be a combination of both of those sources of information in addition to the stakeholder and property owner outreach. So question about cost. What's the difference in initial costs between the two intersection plans?
Hey, Brianne, do you want to talk about costs?
Yeah, so really, as we look at the different combinations of concepts here, the costs are very similar. So when it comes down to it, the roundabout, the initial cost for the roundabout is slightly more, but we're talking about a couple percent more. The initial cost for concept B is also slightly more. So if you are trying to figure out what's the very cheapest option, it's concept A with a signal. If you're trying to figure out what's the most expensive option, it's concept B with a roundabout. But like I said, that being said, the costs are so close together. We're really, it's not a huge driving factor. As we look at costs at this point, because we are really early in the process, we have done a very preliminary cost estimate. We assign kind of a price range to the to the projects until we know more detail and can get deeper into design. And really, we're looking at around a $40 to $50 million project, depending on if it's the low end of our estimate or the high end, or if it's, you know, which combination of concepts it is.
Yeah, let me jump in on that a little bit, just about project funding, because I think it's an important piece of that. So right now, our project is funded for final design. We do not have construction funding for this project. So our schedule for construction is very much so driven by when we can find that construction funding. And depending on how much funding we're able to find, we might look at how we could kind of phase this project up or chop it up. You know, there's kind of three chunks that we can think of. You know, we have Stone to Meridian, we have the Meridian intersection, and then we have the chunk from Meridian to I-5. So we look at the costs for those different sections and look how that lines up with our funding and schedule construction based off of that. And the ranges of the numbers that Brianne mentioned, if you go onto our engagement site, we did present those ranges on there if you're curious to kind of see how things fell. Yeah, did we have time for another question?
Chelsea, were you able to find the information yet, or I can come back to you as well? And it is 7:01, so we're going to wrap up here very shortly, but wanted to check in.
Yes, I was able to find it. Thank you, Candace. So we had 430 people participate in our online open house last time, and we did 2 in-person events and a bunch of stakeholder meetings. And we had 98 people fill out that survey online that was specific to that question with the ranking. And then we also had a bunch of people place dots on the sign in person. It's hard to sort of count the dots versus people, but it's based on the numbers, I'd say we had around 150. And you can check out our survey, or not our survey, our summary from phase 1 on the website if you want to see the details for each of those in person and online.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Chelsea and Candace and team. One other relatively quick question, a creative idea. Is it possible to transplant a relatively small public street tree that would be removed into a park or to replace one in someone's yard? Is that something we've ever done or could consider?
I'll let Jim speak to that, but also I want to add that generally we do try to replace trees that we remove from the public right of way. But Jim, do you want to talk about transplanting street trees?
Well, provided it's a small tree, it is a possibility. It does depend on time of year. And so you always have to look at the construction schedule and make sure that transplanting can be accommodated, but it's something that could be looked at.
All right. Amazingly, I think we got through all of the questions either in writing or in back and forth Q&A. At this point, I'll just say thank you from me for attending. I know it's not always easy to join in the evenings when our energy level is lower for the day, so I appreciate you all being here. Chelsea, I don't know if you're able to share the slides again and take us to Leif's contact information, and I'll turn it to you, Leif, to close us out.
Okay. Well, yeah, thanks everybody for attending our webinar tonight. We hope that the takeaway is that you feel confident as you go into our survey and fill that out and present your feedback to us. We're excited to get that and kind of steer our way forward here. And then again, as I mentioned before, if you have any questions about how to access our website or just about the concepts, don't hesitate to give me a call or send me an email. My contact information is up on the screen. And with that, just thanks again and have a great rest of your evening.